Hello. Good morning, you kickers. How are you doing? It's always a pleasure to be here in Namur, to be here at KIKK. I looked it up. We've actually been here in, I think, 2015, and then other parts of the team in 2019. So every 3 years seems like a good rhythm. I was on my bike traveling across from London and thinking, okay, I'm just going to enjoy and we'll just be a participant and see some great talks. But then Marie made this irresistible offer. And I thought, okay, the only trouble is I haven't really given a talk or speech since 2019. So last night was very busy. But the good news for you is it's fresh content. It's very new material. And I guess I just want to share a little bit where we're at. A lot of things have changed pre and post pandemic, and I turned 40, so there's a lot of things to think about. So my talk today will be called Seeding the Future. And just a general intro, who am I? So I'm a digital artist, designer, creative director. I could probably add a lot more personalities and identities, but most people know me because of I'm the guy who founded Field and has been my only job so far. Field, what is Field? It's a design studio. We say creative design and innovation studio, and we've been going for 14 years, so quite a long time. And in the meantime, the team has expanded. We've sort of organized in 3 different teams doing very different things. And our work usually doesn't really fit into conventional categories. So there was a lot to think about lately, but maybe first some impressions on the studio. So we just moved into this new beautiful place in Hackney and next to Broadway Market. It's an old bus station and it has this really great architecture. We love going on sites and doing trips. Here, I think in Jakarta and Shanghai, and as you'll see, and further, Death Valley, there was a trip we did with the whole team. Before the pandemic, a fantastic place to explore and play, dress up. And yeah, food's the constant that brings the studio together. And there would be another team in Berlin who's got a similar amount of great photos on food events. So that's what brings everyone together. That we have the luxury of having a lot of good cooks, which is a pleasure. And yeah, and sometimes it gets silly, but but today, I usually, in these talks in like earlier years, I would have just showed you the latest projects and update what we've been doing. But I thought I might try something a little bit different. So I kind of, instead of just picking out one thing we did for a client or an arts commission, maybe want to talk about the studio. Because in a way, the studio has been my longest running project of 14 years, and there have been a lot of lessons I wish I didn't have to learn, lessons that if I could speak to my 26-year-old self, I wish I had known before. And I don't think this will be complete in any way, but maybe just to share a few thoughts on what it took to develop Field as a studio. And especially, and that's maybe it's a topic that I probably before wasn't very interested in, entrepreneurship. But if you really see it in the long term, you're building a creative practice. You're building it is an economic vehicle, it's a business, and it's all the things that make it work that make the studio. So, but maybe let's start from the beginning. So starting with, let's say, around 26 or so, I got very confused by these kind of description of roles that were very dominant in the industry. Like, you are a producer, a creative, or a developer. And in some of these studios back in the day, people would sit in a different corner and they would be in a different team, and the team would rarely meet each other unless when they come together to brainstorm, and then they're supposed to be friends and very engaged and interactive. And that is felt very strange. Especially like, okay, when you're German, you really like to pick at words, and you think, okay, what is a producer? What does that mean? It's I'm a creative. I make something. I produce things into the world. So that's I make actual tangible output. So that's a bit strange. And usually, I mean, especially when you're not super famous or you have a big team, you really need to know everything from ideation to concept to creation. So this term producer, I found it a bit strange. And maybe in German you'd say project manager. Maybe there's a better word for it, or project communications manager. But there was some friction in the roles and where things start and end. But the thing is, what became very, very clear to me very quickly is I never wanted to become a producer. So, or anything that has to do with management, because I just wanted to learn how to make great things. I wanted to make the great things that I had in my head. And maybe I was just also intimidated by just the amount of knowledge you need to accumulate to make anything that is worthwhile and can stand to the quality that you see out there on the internet. So maybe I just wanted like every other creative, every person that sort of identifies with that role, I really just didn't want to have anything to do with it. And that is maybe still to this day my artist persona. I still feel this way, but over time, I think I've listened and discovered my entrepreneurial persona and learned from it. So yeah, design the economic model. It incentivizes emotion, physics towards the form. And yeah, I love this quote. It's a bit upsetting. This guy is only 24-year-old and much wiser already. But I mean, a model here doesn't just mean how you pay your taxes and spreadsheets, but it's really seeing your creative practice, your studio, as a holistic project, as something that if you don't plan it out in the right way, certain things are never going to happen. And you don't suddenly find yourself in charge of running a very diverse and vibrant team if you haven't come up with a good name and a story and an attractive idea that brings people in, that allows them to connect to this thing that you're building. So that's all. You have to make an offer to become part of a story. And yeah, luckily I had this intuition from the beginning that I knew that the projects I wanted to make were ambitious. So it needed to be a studio name, not a Markus Wendt studio. It had to be something geared for something larger. And the thing is, and I'm sure I made this mistake many times, is because you are in this creative mindset and you then add people around you, but you really just want to focus on one part. You kind of voluntarily stepping into a golden cage. You're kind of stepping away from the boring business matters, typically handled by the producers, and the creatives they lock themselves in. But the thing is, when you zoom out just a very little bit, then you suddenly notice that actually the most important decisions, they're made by the people who control the finances and the spreadsheets. So what do you work on? Is this even a project we will take on? Is this something that we will reject? Is it something we will invest a lot of our time and energy? Like, these are super important decisions. They define your day-to-day life, and at the end of the day, they define what you make. So I think now, if you are a true creative, you want to be part of those conversations. You want to be participant and give some kind of input. Doesn't mean you have to do everything, but it's something that I see a lot of creatives in my team and other teams are very easily fall into. So yeah, I think being willing to engage is important. The good thing is, when you're sort of in the process of building a studio, building a team, I mean, on the one hand, there isn't a lot of applicable information out there. It's very frustrating, actually. If you try to Google it, most of the sort of business matters are very abstract and removed from the creative world. So I personally didn't find the best resource yet. But the good thing is you're not alone. So there will be others who are in a similar situation to you that have maybe more or a bit less experience or different experience you can connect to. And that's maybe something I didn't really, because, you don't want to talk about money. You don't want to talk about business. It's easier to share some cool creative things that you've made, but really, how does it work? How do you structure your place? That's something that is a bit less talked about. Just some examples. So, especially in a time of post-pandemic, think about the social dynamics. So, each one of these configurations creates a completely different, unique setting. If you work by your own, you have very different needs, a different schedule, a different time frame. If you work together with a partner, then that's different again. You have probably regular chats and syncs. You need to create a space where you can meet. So now you need a studio. What happens when you get your first employee? You have this kind of strange triangular situation. 2 and 1, and then between 3 and 4, you can still have a conversation. But there's something, and it's just a biological, psychological fact, that anything past, I don't know, this number is, 3 to 5, at some point, a group just becomes a forum. So a group where you normally would have had discussions together and people feel empowered and they can speak up and share ideas, all of a sudden just becomes a presenter and lots of people just listening and keeping their comments for themselves. But most of the time that's valuable creative input, or that's really important to know. So each one of those numbers, you go beyond 10 people. That's the sharing information becomes a completely different problem. All of a sudden you have teams, groups within groups, and they start sharing information in a different way. And they have other things to talk about. So each one of those configurations make a radically different studio experience, and in return the work is going to be completely different. So I'm not saying that you must foresee all of it, but it's just being aware of those factors is a huge help. And also thinking about what's the situation that you prefer for yourself? Where do you perform best? What's the most comfortable? But also regarding your ambitions, what do you need? How should your studio be structured? Another thing, because I always thought I'm just doing my thing. I'm just doing everything in a sort of intuitive, freestyle way, and that's how we have run the studio for a long time. But it wasn't necessarily the best way to do it, because it turns out your studio and every other startup is actually not so special. So there is literature about it, there is a theory about it, how a company grows from discovery and ideation phase into a startup and bootstrapping phase, into the sort of growth and establishment phase. And then you go into this even more difficult moment of maintenance and relationships. So what does it mean to be a startup? At what point can you say, I've actually defined my offering or what I'm doing, it's sufficiently clear enough, we're now in startup world where we're moving towards a goal? Or are we still just swimming around and seeing what comes? Which is fine, but I guess it depends on your ambitions and where you want to end up. So if you make plans for it, it's obviously easier to achieve. And you shouldn't be wondering, why does this big I'd like to do these big client projects, these big branding jobs, for example, or make beautiful big artworks. You need to obviously put a structure in place to work towards it and have the team ready to do that. Maintenance and relationships is very important and actually very difficult, because what do you do when you're not the new kid on the block, when you're 7, 8, 9 years old as a studio, and how do you re-energize your team and actually make them care about what they do, the work that you do? So all of that's really important. Probably the best advice I found is reaching out to other founders or other people who are leading or running design studios, because you find there is a lot of very important information that is not on YouTube, not in a tutorial, but is incredibly helpful to design essentially the life that you want and desire. And that's a book tip that I really recommend. It's a very strange way of thinking of, if you understand, everyone knows this like narrative curve, right, of the beginning, middle, end, and peak and trough and drama, and at the end there's this happy ending, hopefully. So the way he thinks is, you can sort of reverse the process and say, okay, what's the situation I'm in? How does it feel? Am I bored or not enough going on? Or do I actually want to push it further? Or is it maybe super stressful right now? You can then look at it and say, okay, usually these things follow a graph, follow a certain narrative. And based on that, you can make better decisions. So maybe what action should you take? Highly recommended. I don't think I'm going to be able to go through everything, but maybe I wanted to get into one chapter that is probably quite important for everyone starting out. Something that was luckily quite apparent to me even as a student. The creative industry is a pyramid with an incredibly broad base. I mean, today they say, you know, everyone is a designer. Anyone with a smartphone is a photographer. So your base is the world. Everyone doesn't really survive or doesn't really make money from that passion. They just do stuff, most of it for free, and then we give it to some social media company. So what you need to do to kind of be relevant in a sector that is actually generates you a living. So you have to really think about that and what makes it special and how do you stand out. I can only share a little bit maybe how this story developed for me. So I spent a lot of time here in this like School of Fine Arts in Kassel. And at the time, the school was going through a radical transformation from a completely liberal, self-directed program in the spirit of the Bauhaus. But then they tried to convert it to a more standardized European bachelor-master system, which meant that I was basically falling through the cracks. I didn't really have anywhere to go, but I actually loved that. And then my personal discovery journey was through things like processing, but then also jumping between all kinds of different courses, from photography to illustration to film and new media. And I always found a way that code would probably come into it. But at the time, I mean, this might seem obvious now because a lot of studios now have a creative technologist or a developer on board. But back in the day, and it's always relevant to the time when you start out, obviously. Today, the questions will be different. Today, the topics will be different. So this is how it was for us, but that was also 15, 16 years ago. So back in the day, the category of generative design, creative code did not really exist. You had underground forums where people were doing stuff, which I found very exciting, but there wasn't really an established studio or business model you can look up to. It was really the new stuff kind of from the grassroots. And I guess when I look at what's going on in those AI forums and everything metaverse, as strange as it seems these days. I'm sure there are these like strange new communities where a lot of interesting stuff is going on. So yeah, I think having the luxury of time and digging to really immerse yourself, that is what did us good. One thing I really loved is this kind of discovery of emergence. Emergence in complex systems. So in that example here, Carl Sims, he constructs these digital life forms, abstract characters with random body compositions. It gives them a challenge. How far can you run, sprint, walk, crawl, or wobble in a fixed amount of time? And then he measures how far do you get. And based on that, he adjusts the DNA of that creature. And if you run that simulation 10,000 times, 100,000 times, these guys actually start to become really good. They really move on and they make a lot of progress. So I thought that was so cool. Like generative design and emergence, this ability to maybe create life in the computer, that's something I've never seen before. But because I was coming from this kind of graphic design background, I was always looking for ways to connect. So connecting these different fields, these different categories together. And how can you apply an idea like emergence to graphic design? I'm gonna skip that video. But essentially, I realized it's an incredibly powerful approach. And that's something that really defined the studio practice from the beginning and still, let's say, as an idea, informs it today. And this quote stuck with me for a really long time. It's essentially, once you're committed, there's always a hesitancy, there's always a chance to kind of draw back. But once you commit yourself to an idea, then all kinds of magic things happen and things fall into place. I realize I'm really running over time, but I also want to show you the new field, if that's okay. So yeah, I said we made some changes lately. So there's not one field, we now have fields, plural. So Field.io is focusing on generative and immersive digital artwork, often for brands, often in a media arts context, and with a very blurry line between art and design. Some projects are completely self-funded, others we apply for the world's largest brands and help them with rebranding and thinking about their future. We work on campaigns of various different types, often with highly visual output, and things that kind of sit between art, science, and technology, and create immersive spaces and experience. This IBM project was one of our favorites. So the new thing is field systems. That started about 3 years ago. We knew that something changed in the landscape, that these individual one-off artworks that I still love to make, at some point that didn't really work for clients anymore. Every project that came in, the question was, how can we make this part of a larger whole, of a framework of some sort? And because we were doing a lot of work in interactive spaces, we thought, okay, this really needs a new name, it's a new category in itself. So we started building field systems as a place where we can really dedicate ourselves to future spaces. And starting from the knowledge of building these interactive and immersive experiences, which the trouble with them always was, like I love to make this stuff, but these projects are one-offs, singular. They never really happened at scale. And that's why we really started to think about, okay, how can we make more of this happen? How can we make this more cost efficient? how can we sort of make them adaptable to all kinds of configurations of spaces. And the result of that after 3 years now is something incredibly ambitious. We're building a kind of operating system for Nike, a brand operating system, which is going to run their next 300 flagship stores across the world. And inside of each of those spaces is a completely modular approach. Every screen, every touch point, every interactive surface is kind of controlled from one place. So emergence in a very large architectural scale. We do that by kind of pulling in all kinds of data from all kinds of places, from campaigns to sports and running data, and everything comes together into this spatial instrument where you can preview and lay out your new store designs as they come. And the system is completely modular and adaptable in the way that someone can sit in Portland and upload a new campaign they've just shot on camera, and then it will automatically transform spaces in Seoul to follow their brand aesthetic, whatever they come up with next. And before that used to be an incredibly tedious process of sending over back and forth emails and data and get approval and reformatting and so on. So it's not just saving them a lot of money, but it's also allows us to build much more cooler experiences in total. But still, that wasn't quite enough. So the work, even between I/O and systems, is quite broad. We noticed that clients are increasingly coming to us with a different type of problem, and that's more about, can you imagine the next evolution of our product? Or we know this and that is going to happen in the future. What does it mean? How do we respond to it? So as a designer, you obviously have this really powerful ability to think and visualize and make this future tangible. And that's incredibly valuable. So we started this new unit, Field Blue, which is focusing on speculative design, which is a combination of scientific and technical research together with more kind of design, guided by design intuition. And it also allows us to be open for new and completely unconventional models of collaboration. So maybe even game developers in Japan and immersive spaces in VR. And yeah, sometimes you don't even know what media you're going to work in and what the category is that you're going to be present. So having an artistic, intuitive guide is incredibly helpful. I think I'm out of time. But yeah, that's it in a wrap. That's our 3 new fields. There's a lot more information on our website. And please come to me if you're interested for any questions or conversations. I'd love to have a chat. I'm here until Saturday. And I think that's it. Thank you.